things. So it's quite nice. We don't need the speakers today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your name and capacity which you appear before the committee, and we'll start with you, Anthony.
My name is Tony Lonergan, and I'm here as a representative of the Denman Aberdeen Muswellbrook Scone Healthy Environment Group.
Yeah, Trevor Woolley, here as myself and for myself.
Excellent.
I'm Rosemary Hadaway. I'm here as Chair of Mudgee District Environment Group.
Thank you. This hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. Before I invite you to all make a brief opening statement, then we proceed to discussions. Would you please state if you're a current or former member of a political party or a union or an investor in the renewables or nuclear industries, please? We'll start with you.
I'm a member of the New South Wales Greens, and I have been a candidate in elections.
I'm a former member of the Engineers Association, Professionals Australia morphed into.
Yep.
I'm a current member of the Sustainable Australia Party.
Excellent. Thank you. I now invite you to all make a brief opening statement before we proceed to questions, and we'll start with you.
Look, my statement will take about 3.5 to 4 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay, yeah.
Okay. DAMSAG is a community organisation dedicated to providing a voice to industry and all levels of government in defence of our natural environment, in the interests of human health and well-being and the protection of biodiversity. We've been operating for about 10 years. We see a number of issues. One impact of the decision to proceed with nuclear power station here in the Upper Hunter will be on the availability of services. It's already difficult to attract professionals such as GPs to the area. A low but a non-zero chance of a radiation leak or more serious accidents will certainly deter some people from moving to Muswellbrook. I personally know 2 music teachers who are dedicated to the local community who will certainly up stakes and leave. This will be an ongoing issue, no matter the perceived safety of nuclear reactors by others in the community. The proposal that radioactive waste be stored on site for the life of the reactor or reactors is totally unacceptable. The world seems set to be a less predictable place in upcoming decades, with conflict and acts of terrorism not out of the question. Construction of a permanent nuclear waste repository must be committed to before any construction of a reactor begins. Finland has set a standard, and the people of the Hunter are entitled to the same standard. The cost must be paid by the generation that uses the electricity, not by their grandchildren, and likewise with the decommissioning costs. I realise the availability of water is going to be looked at during this inquiry, but I'd like to remind the committee that during the Millennium Drought, Glenbourne Dam was perilously close to being empty. The closure of Liddell and the looming closure of Bayswater will release valuable water resources to agriculture and other industries and communities in both normal and the extreme climatic conditions we're likely to see in the future as global warming intensifies. A nuclear reactor will inevitably negate this opportunity for longer-term water security in the Hunter. Another major impact, as we see it, is on the economic opportunities available to the future. We know the coal industry will end sooner or later, and we need a transition plan for this community. We don't want to be Broken Hill, where population halved as mining declined. Over the years, I've attended a number of head-scratching and butcher paper scribbling sessions about how we might fare in a decarbonised world and how we might thrive. There's been some excellent work done by community groups like Hunter Jobs Alliance and Hunter Renewal, by local governments. AGL, Twiggy Forest and others have been heard in this space as well. State and federal governments have had occasional input. This proposal seems to us to be ill thought out, obviously incredibly expensive, and threatens to divert attention from the important work needed to develop a pathway to a sustainable future for communities in the Upper Hunter that have contributed so much to the prosperity of the nation and in fact have already paid a significant environmental price for doing so. You'll have noticed the surrounding terrain of the town of Muswellbrook, no doubt, on your way here. So thank you, and thanks for the opportunity of speaking.
Thank you, Tony. Mr. Woolley.
Yeah, welcome, and thanks for this opportunity. I'm Undoubtedly, you've already heard about timeframes and for building and need for flexibility. Baseload no longer exists. So I'm not going to touch them. What I would like to highlight is something that is very seldom discussed, and certainly what I haven't heard, is the reserve capacity in the network. At the moment, there would be reserve capacity in the network somewhere to compensate for the loss of the biggest unit. The biggest unit's somewhere between 700 and 750 megawatts at the moment. If we increase that to the proposed 1,100 megawatts, that's going to be an incredible reserve capacity we have to have 24 hours a day. Not only that, because of the limits of the interconnectors, we're probably going to have reserve capacity in New South Wales and Queensland and Victoria. The network then becomes incredibly inefficient, and there's a huge cost to that, and it's hidden. It's hidden by the network, but it has to be allowed for. We have a relatively small network. Big machines don't necessarily fit very well or very efficiently. In my submission, I've talked about local jobs. The average job in a coal-fired plant is all about materials handling. It's about ash, dust, coal, milling. Those don't exist anymore. And a lot of people, I don't think, really add up the number of jobs that aren't going to be there in a nuke. There are different types of jobs, but a lot of the jobs aren't going to exist. The thing that really gets to me, though, is the division of our community. There's so much fear, anger, false facts. It's driven by a very poor planning system, and it's driven by people. There is an opportunity to get wealth into regional communities, to safeguard them against drought and financial stress. It's being poorly handled. It's causing divisions in their community, and it's not giving wealth to every person in the community. There's an opportunity to change all of that and bring wealth to all people in the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms Hattaway.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm the chair of Mudgee District Environment Group, as I mentioned, and our submission was a composite effort of many, so I am not a subject expert on the specific points within that. So today I would like to just reiterate our main objections to the idea of initiating any nuclear energy generation in Australia. We believe that the federal and state legal prohibitions against construction of power reactors have served Australia well and should be retained. Nuclear is the least appropriate form of energy for Australia's future, and we support the expansion of renewable energy generation and storage that is rapidly taking the lead role in our energy mix. We urge regulatory and financial incentives to utilise the existing rooftop solar. How often do we hear on the news of Australia being a lead in that? Our community and our households are ready. So what do we need? We need some incentives, some regulatory mechanisms to assist. Rooftop solar, microgrids, community power, they are all there waiting for us to implement as viable and valuable contributions to reduce demand on the energy grid and even out that demand situation that we're constantly told about via the headlines. Of course, pumped hydro would have a capacity to even out that demand as well. So I include that in the renewable components. But of course it's very difficult. As the previous speakers have suggested, there's a lot of community angst, a lot of community division. So the MDEG, Mudgee District Environment Group, recommend to the inquiry that to cut through some of that, there should be respect for and acceptance of legitimate science and verifiable factual reporting. respect for and acceptance of expert, unbiased analysis. If we take that current misinformation and disinformation that seems to be circulating with the horror headlines, we run a huge risk of going along emotionally with that. But there are mechanisms to help us manage that risk. Internationally and nationally, there is an expectation that we adhere to ecologically sustainable development principles, that we acknowledge and incorporate the precautionary principle. If we don't know the full result of something, we don't do it. We operate to the best of our existing knowledge, yes, but we accept that there are limitations. We also are very aware within these guiding principles, internationally accepted, that there needs to be intergenerational equity. The present generation should ensure that the health, diversity and productivity of the environment are maintained or enhanced. What right have we got to leave anything less for future generations? If we consider those principles, the main difficulties with the nuclear energy generation would be waste management, transport and storage. We know that scientifically. Nuclear waste is a problem that no country in the world has yet resolved. No country has a secure long-term facility. At present, waste is generally stored on site. There's a decommissioned nuclear power plant at Sellafield in the UK. It holds thousands of tonnes of radioactive waste, including 140 tonnes of plutonium. The Russians use very small amounts, I understand, personally. The half-life of this plutonium is 24,000 years. Nuclear waste of this sort will need to be stored safely for hundreds of thousands of years. So how can we possibly say we are acting ethically, we are acting sustainably, if we create such waste by going into a nuclear generation future? It is unethical, inequitable and totally reprehensible, I would think, for my generation to do that for thousands of generations into the future. At Plymouth Harbour in the UK, I was on a ferry trip and the commentator said, yes, those submarines over there are in mothballs, not operational. They were nuclear-powered subs. They're beyond their operational life, but they're still sitting there because no one knows what to do with the reactors. It's ludicrous. It is unethical to burden future generations of Australians and of the world. This problem of the waste and storage and transport, I would include in that, it becomes an invisible and unspoken cost. It's way too complex and way too long a time frame for us to attempt to cost that. What is the truth then is that the gen cost estimates that the CSIRO publishes, they cannot and do not attempt to cost that sort of long-term aspect of this industry. Sorry, I'm not sure how my time's going. If I could suggest then, back to one of our main points, if I leave the nuclear waste for a moment and come back to our support for renewables, in the last 10 years, since I have lived off-grid personally, the developments within the renewable components have been amazing. The panels, the capacity, the physical size, and likewise for the turbines. There is increasing technology, developments, improvements in how we manage and have that energy available. in 10 years. It has changed dramatically. So has battery technology. We don't expect that to suddenly stop and turn off, and no, this will be what we have in another 10 years. Recycling of the components of the panels and the turbines are potential growth industries in our regions where the renewable energy zones are being located. Support for renewables, it's very obvious. Just the same as I would conclude by saying Australia should not be pursuing nuclear power. It's clearly the most expensive way in all senses of that word. Expensive financially, environmentally, socially and community. We're hearing of divisions already. And it is also a huge expense to our sense of equity and worth and ethics for our planet and our future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And just before we go to questions, I just would like to acknowledge a couple of people in the room. Barnaby Joyce, member for New England, and his lovely wife Vicky, and also previous Mayor Steve Reynolds and his son as well. Thank you for being here today. And we'll start off with you, Mr Kennedy.
Yeah, thank you. Mr Woolley, you were talking about jobs and the importance to the local economy and materials handling. How many jobs, can you tell me about the number of jobs and the average salary of coal-fire power plants in the region?
Not exactly. At Bayswater, there's, I think, 300 or 400 people working.
Yes.
Don't quote me on that. Average salaries, hard to guess nowadays.
Yes.
100,000 maybe, I don't know.
And then in the intermittent power, solar and wind sector, are you familiar with how many jobs, you know, the number of jobs they're doing and the average salaries, how that compares?
That is new technology, and technology gets away from jobs, whether we like it or not. You take the photography business nowadays. You know, there used to be heaps of people selling film, developing film, transporting film. That's what technology does.
So do I take...
So no, there may not be as many jobs in the new industries. That's normal. I don't think that that's a reason for not doing it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking on mobile phones. We would have.
Yeah. So no, very helpful. No, so fewer jobs in the renewables sector, and you're unsure of the pay. We've had testimony and quoted this in previous inquiries. The US Department of Energy and Employment have recently done a study, and they found 77% of workers in coal power plants can transition to nuclear power plants. They also found those nuclear power plant workers were paid 14% more on average, 50% more than solar or wind, and they also found they employ more people. Given this evidence from the US that the committee's been subject to, shouldn't we be considering, if you're concerned about jobs, considering nuclear power if we're concerned about jobs and employment for the region?
My comments about jobs were that a lot of people misunderstood the jobs that would be in nuclear. I wasn't saying that it would be wonderful. As I said, technology will change jobs and remove jobs, but that has never in the past been a reason for doing things.
But if we have an opportunity,
you do things
if we have an opportunity to keep jobs and they're better paying jobs, and knowing the average power plant has 500 people, isn't that something the region should look at?
Not if every environmental and economic indicator says that it's a dumb idea.
So we've had a lot of evidence. I think last week I was in Adelaide and we had the former chief scientist there, former South Australian of the Year. We had the head of South Australia's Energy and Mining Chamber, all who are imploring us to look at nuclear, lift the moratorium. They noted their belief that South Australia is having the highest. They made the distinction between the costs to generate and the prices people pay. And they said in South Australia, when the wind's blowing, the sun's shining, it's very cheap to generate, but we actually have the highest power prices in the country, over 76%. They implored us to look at nuclear for South Australia and cut them out and to try and lower prices because I was so concerned about industry. When you said everybody says it's environmentally terrible and the most expensive, we've received a lot of evidence from former chief scientists. Shouldn't we be looking at that if we have evidence like that and considering it as part of our mix?
I'll take the prices first. Why are prices high? Prices are high because of the design of the market. The market is designed to allow large corporations to maximise their profit. Okay? It's not designed to give cheap prices.
So
you can redesign
Can you
the market.
explain to me why they're higher in South Australia than every other jurisdiction in Australia in that market?
Because the market works that way. The bulk price of electricity is the same for everybody, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia. And it's driven by the highest cost generator online at the moment. It's not driven by the cheapest one online at the moment. It's not driven by anything but the most expensive. And I can tell you that the executives drool over a coming hot day and how they can manipulate the price and get it sky high. That whole marketing thing is why the prices are high. There's heaps of things you can do to change the market to bring the prices down.
Sure. You talked about wealth of the region as well. As part of any nuclear power plant, a region will receive a regional deal, which will include infrastructure funding, services funding, also integrated economic development zones for manufacturing, such as smelting, like Tomago, mineral processing, high technology sectors to provide incentives for those businesses to work there. Isn't this something an area like the Hunter should be looking at, which could have job challenges with coal coming offline?
But at the same time, you look at a place like Hay, where they struggle, they've got climate problems, they've got agriculture which makes a profit sometimes but not otherwise, they've got a town that's shrinking, and they've got people who want to put wind farms and solar farms outside, and they did some very, very good work. They got the developers all together and the people of town in the room together, and they said, what does this town need? They said, we need some aged care facilities, and one of the developers has now agreed to develop, instead of bringing dongers on site and then sending them off site, to put them outside town and arrange them in a way where it can be used in the future as an aged care facility. A different developer has agreed to upgrade his accommodation so that it can be used as cheap housing and brought to town later. So it's not a matter of whether the Hunter can benefit, it's a matter of whether the regions can benefit. And there's a lot of people with a lot of anger and a lot of angst saying a lot of things that are untrue. And the planning system doesn't help, because the planning system allows individual developers to talk to individual landholders and other people miss out. It's a matter of making the planning system so that the whole community can benefit.
And just on that, do you feel like the planning system and the community consultation for the current rollout of intermittent power, are your comments on that and saying that should be improved and is not operating effectively?
It's disastrous at the moment.
Tell us more about that.
Go for a drive and have a look at all the signs strung up along the road. Go to the communities and listen to a lot of the people. Listen to a lot of the politicians who are driving it.
And what are you hearing about the planning?
Anger, division, fear, false truths.
And that's about the renewable rollout as
Yes.
well? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Ms Hathaway, just on waste, you talked about waste and that's an issue. What's your view on, we were in South Australia last week, there's 125 sites that have waste in Australia, in New South Wales. I think it's in the many hundreds, with hospitals, dentists, nurses. The nuclear submarine industry has waste, obviously ANSTO has waste. Do you accept that nuclear waste is a problem we have and we have to work out where to store that?
Absolutely, because there is not a storage facility that has capacity to deal with the waste.
So what should we do about the waste we already have and the waste we're going to have from medical and submarines?
I would prefer to consider the waste that we do have, because I think our future waste is up to us.
But what should we do with the waste we currently have in the Mudgee environmental group's view?
They are minimal. I'm probably going to use inappropriate words, I'm not sure. Low toxicity, perhaps, and a fairly minimal quantity.
What
But
about,
even so, there have been accidents at Lucas Heights.
because some of the
It becomes a hidden cost.
yes,
That, we were speaking of electricity charges, for instance, and there seems to be a lot of perhaps misrepresentation that what we pay for within our energy bill reflects the actual cost of the electricity, which is total bunkum.
yeah, but
So this storage becomes a hidden cost,
yep.
because you might not pay for that storage, say, in the UK, where they're looking at Australian estimate of 500 billion to create some storage and management of the waste. You lose, you pay in some other way.
Yes,
Because
sorry to
it must
cut
be
you off because I'm just short on time because I know the
Yes,
chair will keep
sorry.
me honest here. But so you accept we have waste already and we have to find somewhere to put it though, right?
It is being stored at the moment.
Yes.
But,
Yeah.
yeah.
But we do not yet have a long-term storage facility in Australia.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yes, yeah. And that's just
it-
something the Albanese
it's
government's
not my
trying to
expertise.
find, and we're doing our
Yeah.
best. You talked about, just a question to the group, you talked about, I think you used the words, okay, it's a disaster, Mr Woolley, in terms of the engagement process with the local community around the renewable and intermittent power rollout. The Coalition's policy for nuclear is to propose a 2.5-year engagement program on nuclear with every local community. As part of that 2.5 years, it will not be political parties engaging, it will not even be government engaging. It'll be appointed independent bodies who actually are there to engage the community, survey them, survey all the groups over a 2.5-year period. Has something like that been done prior to the renewables rollout? Yes or no? And based on that experience, what would you suggest is changed or added to any nuclear engagement process if the Coalition were to win?
As far as I'm aware, the planning process at the moment is that if you buy a block of land and you want to do something on it, you can decide to do it, and then if you want to do a wind farm, well, you start talking to the neighbours, you start talking to the adjoining landholders and the government. That process seems to be taking 2, 3, 4 years, but it's not being very well done. It's being done by individual developers. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 developers in the town. If the government, if a Liberal government is elected and they do that consultation, that's good, but that's not a reason to do it. It's just a way of doing it.
Thank you, Mr Woolley.
Thank you, Mr Kennedy. Ms Mascarenhas.
Good morning, and thank you for your testimony today. One of the speakers spoke about the reserve capacity, and I was wondering what you see the impact being of introducing a nuclear power station on the price of electricity, and whether that would have an increase the electricity bills of people in your neighbourhood.
Very, very hard to predict. How do you predict the market behaviour of a power station built in 20 years' time? They may decide to generate flat out, no matter what the price, and I just want to generate, get cash flow. They may decide to play some other game. What effect that has on the market at the time is very hard to tell.
Thank you for that. I also wanted to get an understanding of water resources in the region and if there are agricultural uses for water and whether you think that there would be enough water for cooling of a nuclear power station and making sure that we're looking after cattle or produce.
The AGL, who owns Bayswater Power Station, owns the top 50 metres of water in Glenbourne Dam. That was arranged back when the Electricity Commission built the power station. They extended the dam wall an extra 50 metres high. Since then, though, the power stations have been buying as many water licences as they can. The agriculture in the Hunter is still there. It still uses a lot of water. There's a lot of competition for the water licences. I'm no expert on exactly how much water is left or where the licences reside.
Thank you. Someone was also speaking about intergenerational equity, and I think you're one of the first speakers that I've heard speak about that. And the thing that I'm wondering from that perspective is what you see as the most alarming for future generations. Is that, does that relate to power prices or in authentic action on climate change? If you could talk about that in a bit more detail.
Yes, thank you. I believe intergenerational equity covers all aspects of our life. Now, without a healthy environment, a stable climate, the biodiversity of our planet, that's what keeps us alive, and non-polluted, sufficient water. The more we pollute water, the less we actually have. So there's equity in those big picture things. I don't pretend to go anywhere near financial equity for future generations. Who knows what that scenario might be. But I believe it is an ethical and responsible matter that we need to be aware of these principles.
I'm happy to leave my questions there and share the call.
Thank you. Dr Molino.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Thanks all for your evidence. Mr Woolley, I just wanted to ask about some of the issues around consultation around renewables projects locally. Do you expect that there would be at least as much and possibly more controversy and complication, community views, if there was a push towards grid-scale nuclear?
It'd be very interesting. I wouldn't like to say one's bigger than the other. I would have thought, though, that the repercussions of a large nuclear industry would have been fairly controversial.
And just one additional question on consultation. We heard from an expert in social licence who had undertaken some analysis of processes in the United States, and she said that it often turned out to be problematic where the location was announced in advance and then consultation occurred, and that what was critical was that the community had a right to say no if there was to be genuine engagement. Would you agree with that, that if there was any kind of consultation or engagement process, that the community needs to have a right to say no and to veto the project?
Gee, that's a can of worms. The easy answer is, well, of course, yes. But how on earth would you make the decision on whether the community was against it and whether it was worth a veto? That's a can of worms. Certainly our current planning system favours greatly the developer. But gee whiz, how you impose some other rigour to that, I wouldn't even hazard to guess.
And just a question on the development of standards and regulation. Do you expect that it would be a complicated process to develop the necessary regulatory regime and standards to apply if we were to move to full-scale nuclear power?
Complicated in many ways. The international organisations do have voluntary standards for many of the safety aspects of nuclear. How applicable they are to Australia, I'm not sure. But you would also have to pick up a lot of other Australian standards that are mandated in our legislation. So yes, it would be a long and complicated process with many aspects to it, technical only one of them.
Thanks. And last question for Ms. Holloway. You talked a bit about waste, and I just wanted to ask a question that we've struggled for a long period of time, for decades, to manage even small amounts of waste and relatively low-grade waste from the facility that we already have here. I mean, how difficult do you imagine it's going to be to deal with what would be much larger volumes of waste and much higher grade waste?
I think it would be extremely difficult because at the moment no country in the world has been able to manage their waste and store it with any confidence that it will remain in that storage facility, that there is no way of dealing with it. Once the genie's out of the box, we can't put it back in. The UK is currently decommissioning their power stations that were built in the 50s, 70s and 90s, and the cost is horrendous.
And do you think we should resolve that issue before we kick off on going down this path?
It has to be a huge red flag in any consideration of nuclear energy generation. To me, it's almost the largest red flag. What are we doing to our planet by creating this huge level of toxic pollution for many thousands of generations? We have no right to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Molino.
Thanks for your evidence. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for providing evidence today. Interested to start with just want to frame a few things. So we currently have a renewables, gas and coal energy market. That I think we can all agree that that's where we currently sit. Under the Liberal National Party's policy direction, they're talking about shifting that to renewables, gas and nuclear. Just interested if we can get a bit of a generalised view here. Do you agree that it's probably 15 to 20 years if the LNP were to be elected next year before we'd see our first nuclear plant come online and provide energy to the grid? Is that the fair estimation?
I think it's too short.
You think it might take longer?
Yes.
Yourself, Mr. Lonergan?
I mean, I can refer to all of the there have only been 5 plants built in Western countries in the last 35 years. Mm-hmm. All of them have been hugely overrun in time and cost. 4 were built. The 5th one wasn't built. At the one in South Carolina, the company closed down and just left $9 million on the table. It is not economic. Now, what they're doing in China is a different story.
Yep.
Although China has half the world's reactors planned, 29, I believe, they have in construction, or at the same time in 2023, China's new generation capacity, 12% was coal, 86% was renewable, and 0 was nuclear. So it's clear where other countries are going. Mm-hmm. And it's cost is the main reason. And no one is tackling. I think Finland has made a reference to Finland. They're building an underground repository in stable geological, stable granite, but no one else is doing it. Now that Americans, the United States government built a repository in, I think, Yucca Mountain. I think it's in Utah. It's all set to go, and then the state of Utah said, we do not want this here. Now in Australia, there's been an attempt to put to build a repository for low-level nuclear waste, I think in South Australia. Aboriginal people don't want it on their country either. So you've got this intractable, where are we going to put this? No one wants it in their space. And low-level waste from Lucas Heights is contaminated gloves and stuff like that. This is not, large volumes of high-level waste. We can't just leave this stuff in tanks on these sites for, well, how long are we going to be there for? Like 100 years, 1,000 years? I mean, this stuff it's very long lasting. It can be dealt with properly and safe. There is a better way to do it than not do it at all. But that's very costly. It has to be done. No one in the world is doing it except Finland's starting to do it. So you have to have that as part of the process. You can't just say, we're just going to leave it there till the life of the plant and then let our grandchildren look after it. This has to be planned as part of the process.
Ms. Hadaway, did you have something to add to that?
I think initially we were talking about timelines. Yeah. And I acknowledge that the consultation for the renewable energy zones has contributed to a delayed timeline there because the planning system is so horrendously complex, and also because of past governments' inability to plan our grid by privatising was probably the first problem. So the whole planning, community consultation, let's go on this journey together, has not occurred in the renewable energy zones. And we have angst and community division. I could not picture the angst, community division and how in the world you would navigate through attempting to create a nuclear energy reactor. We have the legal and policy framework to undo that is there now, and you have community consultation, which we've alluded to is a difficult process in New South Wales at the moment. So that the timeline is likely to expand hugely. It's just not viable.
So the reason why I've asked that about timeline 15 to 20 years, 7 days ago Peter Dutton made a Facebook post, and at the bottom of his post he alludes there that Australians deserve affordable, reliable and cleaner power, and that's what a coalition government will deliver. Cheaper power prices, inferring that potentially overnight our power price bills will come down. Now, with a timeline of 15 to 20 years, do you see foreseeably that household residents across this country would expect to see their power prices come down because an LNP government is elected in the 2025 election?
The others have suggested it's a market mechanism created by governments in the past who have privatised everything, and profit is the priority.
So you think it's unlikely?
We're in a real mess with this whole thing. If we could only wind back the clock 10 or 20 years, here's a discussion paper put out in 2017, 100% renewables grid by 2030, a discussion paper from 2017. BZE, Beyond Zero Emissions, had a plan for a renewable energy grid earlier than this one. We've had the answer, but the privatisation of the energy market, with the market forces and the way it operates at the moment, and the players within that, have destroyed any relative genuine cost of electricity to the price you pay on your bill. There's no relationship. It's all just a fiction. But we do have capacity to utilise the developments within the renewable industry as the technology is racing ahead there, and the jobs are there too. 14,000 are needed in the Central West Orana Renewable Energy Zone for the construction. So, you know, a few hundred, I think we said, work at Bayswater. There is ample opportunity to broaden our discussion, look at not only waste, but the whole planning system, our community engagement. For God's sake, we all live on this planet. Can we at least talk together and move on the same pathway with transparent planning, transparent policies that are not bought by vested interests? Take the community with you and we can be there. I have great faith in Australia, but there's blockages that are creating mis and disinformation, and we need to come back to basic principles of equity.
Thank you, Mr Burnell. We've run out of time, so I've just got one quick question. Do you think it's acceptable that the opposition put out a nuclear plan that Mr Burnell has got here, he's been reading from, that has only given 7 sites and has not given any other information in 6 months? It hasn't given the types of reactors they're going to use, the size of reactors they're going to use, the time frame to build each reactor, to hyper-localise this, when will Liddell actually start to get built and how much water is required? Do you think that's acceptable that the Australian public and the people of the Hunter don't know that information?
Not at all. I mean, what are we actually signing up for? I mean, a lot of people are very enthusiastic about it without having any idea what's involved. There was a poll done, maybe I read one poll the other day, 51% of men support the idea of nuclear energy, 26% of women. And when the question is asked, what about if it's in your town, it drops significantly. So there's just no detail. I mean, people are unaware of the actual cost of this. I mean, it's going to take, all coal-fired power stations will be closed before the nuclear capacity is not going to replace the coal-fired power stations and doesn't pretend to. So what are we going to do in the meantime? Gas. I mean, currently gas is the most expensive form of electricity generation in Australia. Is that the?
Thank you. Yeah. Just be quick, if that's okay.
It's not acceptable, but it's worked.
Yeah.
We are here. The Leader of the Opposition's name has been mentioned many times. It will be on the front page of a newspaper. Make out an outrageous statement and you get on the front page of a newspaper. It works.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think ditto.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time today. If you've been asked to provide any additional information, including questions on notice, please forward it to the Secretariat by Friday the 10th of January 2025. Please note that responses to questions on notice will be published on the website as submissions to the inquiry. You'll be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence to assist you with answering questions taken on notice today, and you will have an opportunity to request corrections to transcription errors. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What was the other guy's name again? Just coming into this one.